Special Committee on the Canada-People's Republic of China relationship. Pursuant to the order of reference of May 16, 2022, the committee is meeting on its study of the Canada-People's Republic of China relations. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Please wait till I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, you can click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you're not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen, that little globe icon of either floor, English, or French. And for those in the room, of course, you could use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, raise your hand. Of course, we have a speaking order, so I think that's going to be okay. For members on Zoom, if there's something that you would like, especially our witnesses, to add to the discussion, please use the raised hand function so that we can recognize you, because that quite often happens where we're asking questions of one person, but somebody else has something very valuable to add. So use that raised hand function as you will to draw the attention of the chair and the clerk, and we'll try and do our best to keep the speaking order as tight as possible. So as per the motion adopted on March 26, 2024, we're hearing testimonies in relation to matters revealed in the Winnipeg Lab documents. I'd now like to welcome the before that, just to look at our own roster here around the table. Wanted to welcome Ms. Idla in place of Ms. McPherson, Mr. Cooper for Ms. Landsman, Dr. Ellis for MP Seaback, Mr. Iacono for Member of Parliament Oliphant, and MP Villemure for MP Bergeron. So welcome to all of you. So from the Department of Health, we have Dr. Stephen Lucas, Deputy Minister by video conference, Nadine Huggins, Assistant Deputy Minister and Chief Security Officer, Corporate Services Branch. From the Public Health Agency of Canada, Heather Jaffrey, President, Dr. Guillaume Poliquin, Vice President, National Microbiology Laboratory by video conference. Donald Shepard, Vice President, Infectious Diseases and Vaccination Programs Branch, again by video conference. I understand that Ms. Jeffrey is the one with an opening statement for up to 5 minutes. So, Ms. Jeffrey, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to appear before the committee today to discuss the documents tabled in Parliament on February 28th related to the termination of 2 scientists at the National Microbiology Laboratory in 2021. This is a very important discussion. The mandate of the Public Health Agency is to protect and promote the health of Canadians, and the National Microbiology Lab is an essential tool in that work. During the COVID pandemic, the work of the lab in rapidly developing diagnostic tests, genomic sequencing, wastewater surveillance, modeling, and research into medical countermeasures were critical to Canada's response then, and also to our ability to face future health threats. The Public Health Agency of Canada takes its accountability to Parliament and to Canadians very seriously. The agency has fully supported the work of the panel of arbiters and their deliberations to review the redactions in the package of documents that were tabled by the Minister of Health. Every day, our employees work with integrity to protect and promote the health of Canadians. We not only expect, but require our employees to abide by the Code of Conduct and the Values and Ethics Code for the public sector. As
the committee has heard from previous witnesses, the global threat environment is constantly evolving. Canada's excellence in research science is underpinned by collaboration. However, we know that science is also of interest to actors seeking economic and technological advantage.
Since these events took place, our security posture and policies have been strengthened and adapted. This cannot be a static effort. Processes have been put in place to ensure that our posture is continually reassessed in line with the evolving risks in order to ensure that we remain fully prepared to address them, not only now, but in future.
The package of documents tabled in Parliament reflect the results of an administrative investigation initiated in 2019 into the activities and subsequent termination of employment of 2 scientists at PHAC's National Microbiology Lab. At that time, research security concerns were also referred to the appropriate law enforcement authorities for investigation.
The investigation showed that the 2 individuals clearly failed to disclose and, in fact, took steps to conceal important information about their activities and affiliations from their employer, including their work with China. Their failure to follow security protocols and their failure to disclose their collaborations led to their suspension, the revocation of their security clearances, and ultimately their dismissal. As of January 20th, 2021, the two scientists were no longer employed by the Public Health Agency. The NML has always operated as a secured facility. However, the administrative investigation initiated in 2019 highlighted that the policies and procedures in place at the time needed to be further strengthened, along with measures to ensure compliance and to mitigate the risks posed by the current threat environment. En réponse, l'agence a...
In response, the agency has invested significant time and attention to ensure research and science policies have a renewed focus on security.
Specific physical, personnel, cyber, and operational security measures have been updated, while also galvanizing an institutional culture that recognizes their responsibility to ensure full awareness and implementation of these measures in light of the important work of the NML and the ever-shifting threat landscape. This is consistent with efforts across the Government of Canada to support innovation and research, while also protecting national security. The development by Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada of national security guidelines for research partnerships and identification of sensitive research areas are recent examples of this work. FAC complies fully with biosecurity regulations, the Human Pathogens and Toxins Act, and the Transportation of Dangerous Goods Program, and works closely with regulatory bodies to ensure ongoing compliance. All international collaborations require review from a security perspective, and governance is in place to vet and approve new collaborations. This includes the mandatory use of material transfer agreements, as well as formal agreements to structure collaborations such as collaborative research agreements, and a strengthened policy on affiliations with academic, research, and healthcare organizations as part of a suite of additional scientific integrity policies.
PHAC has established clear and regular training and communication on security and employee accountabilities. The NML has a renewed, proactive security posture that has reinforced the physical security of the building. Screening measures are strictly enforced for all staff and external visitors, including the requirement for visitors to be accompanied at all times and without exception.
The processes and policies that are in place will continue to be evaluated and enhanced with the view to continuously protecting the confidence and trust of Canadians in our work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jeffrey. Now, I understand that we have an issue, a technical issue with one of the monitors in the room, so we're going to suspend for a moment. It has to be unplugged and plugged back in again. It works on a lot of things, and hopefully it will work this time, so we'll suspend for a minute. discussion, and we will begin with our first round of questions. MP Chong, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for appearing again in front of our committee. Reports some time ago suggested that Dr. Chu and Dr. Cheng could sue the Government of Canada. So my first question is, can you confirm that there are no legal proceedings that have been initiated by either Drs. Chu or Cheng against the Government of Canada?
I'm in a position to confirm that they had filed a complaint with the National Security and Intelligence Review Agency with regard to the suspension of their clearances.
Okay, and that's the extent of any proceedings that they have initiated to your knowledge?
As far as I'm
Okay,
aware.
thank you. One of the things we're trying to understand at the committee is why it took 10 months for the lab to be secured, 10 months between the discovery of a patent improperly registered in the People's Republic of China and July 5th of 2019 when the two scientists were escorted out of the lab. And so my questions are framed in that light to try to understand why it took 10 months. So my first question is, when did the Minister of Health and her office first become aware of the national security breaches at the lab?
My understanding is that the Minister of Health was briefed at different junctures in the investigation to be informed of decisions that were being taken by the deputy head of the agency in line with the administrative investigations. For example, in June 2019 on the results of the fact-finding investigation, in August 2020 on the suspension of the employees, and in January 2021 on their firing.
The minister's office or the minister made aware before June of 2019?
My understanding is that they were briefed periodically. I don't have specific dates.
Okay. Could you get back to the committee and let us know when the minister and her office were first made aware of this this issue at the lab?
Yes, we will look back at the records.
Thank you.
And,
when did the president of the agency, your predecessor, first become aware of these national security breaches at the lab?
my understanding is that the initial briefings led to some identification by the security branch of the health portfolio, and that the opening of the fact-finding investigation was subsequently authorized. I don't have the specific date that the president would have been briefed on this, but the security branch did launch with the president of the agency that fact-finding investigation in December 2018.
Okay. I mean, the reason why I asked this, Madam Jeffrey, is that the role of the president, the responsibilities of the president, the authorities of the president are to grant security clearances and to oversee the classification of employees and the access of those employees to the lab. So I think if you could let us know at some, after, if you could let us know, let the clerk of the committee know when the president first became aware of these breaches, because it's material to that that person's responsibility to ensure that security clearances are appropriate at the lab. The president of PIAC exited her role as president of PIAC on February 27th, 2019. A new deputy head was not appointed until May 6th of that year. So there was a period of about 10 weeks in which there was no president of PIAC. So my first question is, was there an interim or acting president of PIAC during that period from the end of February to the beginning of May of 2019?
Yes, as is normal, an interim president would be appointed with delegation during that period.
And who was that? What was that role? Was it an ADM or was it a director general? Like what? Who was the acting president during that period?
The acting president during that period was the chief public health officer.
Chief public health officer. And did that person, the chief public health officer, did she have the delegated authority over security clearances for the lab?
The policy on delegation resides with the deputy head. However, the approval of individual clearances is delegated to the chief security officer of the agency.
Okay, and so that wasn't, the delegation to the chief security officer wasn't just for that interregnum period. It's generally delegated at all times.
Yes, given the volume and size of the agency, the sort of day-to-day decision-making on security clearances resides with the chief security officer.
Okay, and when did the chief security officer first become aware of the national security issues at the lab?
So my understanding is that in August of 2018, subsequent to a briefing that was given for general awareness by the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, that the potential concerns regarding the vulnerability of lab employees to potential influence were flagged to the service, and fact-finding began, and that in September, potential issues began to be identified, and the chief security officer was involved in those discussions.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now go to Mr. Francosatos for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for being here. Just to clear some things up from previous meetings to ensure the record is correct, the scientists in question, were they agents of the Chinese state or were they Canadian in fact?
Scientists in question were Canadian citizens, long-standing employees of the lab, and respected in their field of scientific effort.
Thank you very much. Was the shipment of live Ebola and Henipa virus to the Wuhan Institute authorized?
Yes, the shipment to the Wuhan Institute was authorized as per the standard procedures of the lab. The procedures around its transit were in full compliance with the relevant act and with biosafety regulations.
You've answered my next question, which was whether or not all of this went through the necessary checks, so thank you very much. Were there any unauthorized shipments of removal of pathogens from the lab?
Mr. Chair, we have a very rigorous procedure to audit and account for all of the pathogens and toxins at the lab, and we are 100% certain that there were no unauthorized removals of high-consequence pathogens or toxins from the lab environment at any time.
Thank you, Ms. Jeffrey. In your presentation, or your testimony rather, you went over steps that have been taken to ensure best practices going forward. Could you just reiterate the keys there, that what you would say would be the kind of key or signature advances that have been made to ensure, as I say, best practices now and in the future?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There are sort of 5 main areas of program improvements to security that we made at the lab. First, around physical security, we have tightened physical security screening measures. We've installed a modernized access control system, enhanced video surveillance and monitoring, strict protocols for delivery and shipping. We have improved our IMIT information technology to guard against cyber risk, comprehensive threat risk assessments, new procedures for information and travel, completed updates to key functions. We have a new policy on affiliations, a new updated approach to student hiring and strict requirements, and new structures for governance and approval, including a science security committee, enhanced incident response and monitoring protocols, compliance monitoring, and requirements for declarations of conflict of interest and affiliations.
Thank you very much. That's quite thorough. How are these introduced? In consultation with whom? And I'm just trying to understand how exactly decisions were arrived at. How did you make the decisions to go in this particular direction? Who advised? These kinds of things.
So in response to any incidents, including the ones identified in this case, we work with national security and law enforcement, public safety personnel, as well as with our chief security officer in the branch to identify improvements to protocols and procedures that would help to prevent or to provide early warning to any such incidents in the future. It's really important to review these constantly given the evolving nature of security threats and to maintain our investments and not just physical updates, but also extensive programs of training and employee awareness because these measures are strengthened by a culture where everyone is not only aware but fully compliant with the measures that are in place. So we have expended energy on both these fronts.
Understood. You just mentioned employee awareness. Can you go into, Ms. Jeffries, what is done to ensure as much employee awareness in the context, as you say, of evolving threats, ever-evolving threats?
We've implemented mandatory training to raise awareness and provide guidance on the security responsibilities and accountabilities of all staff and security personnel at all levels. We've enhanced our onboarding and departure procedures. We have clear and regular communication in writing and through town halls and other measures in terms of security and conflict of interest and regular updates to those processes.
And to what extent are you engaged, or is the organization engaged, rather, with international contacts, counterpart organizations, either in the Five Eyes or G7 contexts?
International collaboration in this field is key to success. There is a limited set of international counterparts that work in this field and that have labs at the level of that Canada does. So we are in constant contact with them, as are our national security and law enforcement personnel, to compare our security posture, to share enhancements, and to ensure that we are keeping pace with the evolving nature of the global situation.
Monsieur le Président, je m'excuse. Appel au règlement.
Oh, yes.
Point of order.
Je m'excuse, je n'entends pas les réponses.
I'm not hearing the answers from Ms. Jeffrey as her voice trails off and her volume goes much lower at the end of her sentences. So perhaps speak more clearly and louder, please.
Yes, if I was back in my old drill as radio program director, I'd be talking to you about mic technique. So make sure you speak up consistently. Lovely. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll move
Thank
it
you.
closer.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I'm out of
Right.
times.
All right, so you get to try again now. Mr. Villamore, the next 6 minutes are yours.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for being here with us to our witnesses. I'll say this a bit briefly. How come this series of events was even possible?
I would say that we have quite strict security procedures and processes in place. In this particular situation, we were dealing with two employees, Canadian scientists eminent in their field, who took measures to hide their affiliations and aspects of their work. It was through awareness and training that the public health agency and the lab personnel at the time identified a potential source of concern and then launched a series of investigations. Those successive investigations uncovered different layers of incidents, first allegations, and then sought evidence and enlisted.
Merci. Je m'excuse.
Thank you. Sorry to cut you off, but I just want to get right to the point. Since then, you have implemented certain policies. If I understand correctly, however, they were already in place and they were not followed. Is that because of a lack of supervision, of responsibility? What happened?
I would say we've significantly enhanced our policies because we are always looking for ways to detect and respond to such cases as early as possible. as well as to keep pace with evolving threats. In this case, employees were taking active steps to hide their activities and indeed made false declarations to the officials throughout their investigation. And it was only through the tools available to our security, intelligence, and public safety institutions under their governance and acts that allowed us to uncover the evidence that allowed us to proceed.
Understood. My previous colleague asked a question, and I would like to follow up. Were the two scientists Canadian citizens, or were they agents of the People's Republic of China? Is it possible that they were both? That's my question.
Yes, Mr. Chair. In this case, these were indeed Canadian citizens and eminent scientists. However, the investigation shows, and through our Canadian Security Intelligence Service colleagues, brought forward evidence that they were working in undeclared collaborations with the Institute in China, and for this reason, they were terminated.
Est-ce que vous avez pu conclure que c'était des...
Were you able to conclude that they were actually agents or investigators from the People's Republic of China or from their army?
The investigations brought forward, including the reports that were tabled in Parliament from the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, showed that they were engaged in discussions with the Thousand Talents program in China and other talent programs that were incompatible with their status at the lab, and that they lied to cover these activities.
Et si je coupe court aux métaphores?
If I get right, cut to the chase, the answer is yes. Is that correct?
I think the documents speak for themselves in terms of the activities that they outlined that the scientists engaged in that were undeclared.
Dites-moi, lorsque vous avez...
When you found out about this issue, you asked an external agency to do an investigation. Why did you go to the private sector? Why didn't you go in with another organization that was internal? Why did you not go towards our own intelligence services?
Mr. Chair, we pursued a number of different avenues in parallel. So initially, it was the security branch of the health portfolio that conducted some initial fact-finding, for example, uncovering the patent in September of 2018 that launched the subsequent investigations. There are areas of the investigation that are administrative in nature. At the same time, our national security counterparts were notified and began their own parallel investigations. However, it is standard practice to ensure the independence of the investigation and full dedicated focus on it to contract with external agencies that have the required expertise to do so, but I would underline that this was in parallel to national security and law enforcement efforts.
Et comment Presidium Security Consulting?
How did Presidium Security Consulting, how were they chosen? What were the criteria?
I'll maybe turn to our Chief Security Officer to respond to that question.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, normally there is a standing offer that we rely on for these types of investigations of administrative nature. And I can certainly come back to the committee with the details around how that particular contract was awarded.
Thank you, Ms. Huggins. Thank you, Mr. Villamur. We'll now go to Ms. Idla for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. It's a pleasure to be here. It's quite concerning as well to hear that this government did not enforce measures or protocols to keep Canadian research and intellectual property secure. So one of my immediate questions is, when these measures or protocols were not enforced by the government, who was it that was not enforcing these measures or protocols?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. In this case, there was intellectual property at play, and this was the patent that was initially identified at the time and is evidenced in the documents. There were different discussions about whether the intellectual property at question was indeed something that was proprietary or would have been more broadly available. The investigation, however, uncovered evidence of other collaborations that were underway that were undeclared. The protocols and procedures around the requirements for approving international collaboration agreements were subsequently reinforced, and the issues relating to the definition of what constitutes intellectual property have also been reinforced through awareness campaigns and underlined with the management of that office, which has been centralized and strengthened.
How often does the agency meet with CSIS or other relevant security agencies to improve operational security of Canada's research facilities?
At the time of these events, my understanding is that there were quarterly briefings taking place with different research institutions, of which the National Microbiology Lab was one. I would say that in intervening years, our relationship has become even closer. The expanded activities of the agency in response to the global pandemic, the importance of the intellectual property and the science related to our vaccines, but indeed many areas of health research require very close collaboration that has been reflected in the recently launched ISED research security partnership policy that indeed focuses on the kinds of scientific cooperation that occur throughout the Canadian research community, not only within the Government of Canada or the Public Health Agency, but across the country. And so these are risks and important scientific value that need to be protected across the country, not only within the labs of the Public Health Agency.
You mentioned in a previous response some of the policies that have changed, and I wonder if you could share with us over the last 5 years what has been done to improve the resilience of departmental activities from foreign interference.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think one of the most important activities that has taken place is awareness, employee communications, engagement, and indeed it was awareness briefing that raised the risk of these particular cases. The mandatory training, the emphasis on security responsibilities for all of our staff, no matter where they work and at what level, in addition to the physical and, of course, cybersecurity posture that has been enhanced. So if I can say, both the hardware and the software of how we deal with security has been fundamentally strengthened and improved. The work of committees like this one is very important to continuing to raise that awareness, and we're continuing to adapt our procedures as threats evolve in line with their consultations with law enforcement and security counterparts.
What could agencies like yours do to do? What could you do better to report national security incidents to parliamentarians?
I think there have been a number of structures set up to look at national security issues, the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, but also, for example, in this case, the ad hoc committee structure that was struck and the panel of arbiters used a number of different techniques to ensure that information that related to national security could be divulged to the maximum extent possible while still protecting what is highly sensitive information. For example, the technique of summarizing key national security information so as not to reveal sensitive information about sources and other issues has been effective in allowing the content to be released in some cases while protecting the methods and sources.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Idlout. We'll now go to Mr. Cooper for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Jeffrey, who did the two scientists, Dr. Chu and Dr. Cheng, report to?
I'm going to turn to my colleague, Dr. Politican, to confirm.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Chu reported to Dr. Gary Copinger within special pathogens. Dr. Cheng reported to Grant McClarty, though has different functions within the lab over his course of his employment.
Can you provide the titles of those two individuals?
Yes, Dr. Copinger was Chief of Special Pathogens, and Dr. McClarty was the Director of the Scientific Technologies Core.
And are they both employed at the lab or with PHAC today?
Both individuals have taken up other opportunities over the course of the past several years.
Did the 10-week delay for the Prime Minister to appoint a new president of PHAC have an impact on securing the lab?
I can say that we move forward, Mr. Chair, as expediently as possible to with the investigations. Initially, we had circumstances, then allegations, but given the severity and impact of them, it was very important to have evidence. And as soon as evidence was secured, we moved forward.
I asked you a specific question respectfully. Did the gap, the 10-week period in which there was no one at the top of PHAC, have an impact on the ability to secure the lab, yes or no?
No.
Okay, thank you for that. Between the time that red flags were first raised about Dr. Chu and Dr. Cheng in the fall of 2018 through to the time that they were marched out of the lab on July 5th of 2019, were any restrictions during that nearly 11-month window placed upon them in terms of their access to the lab?
I'm going to turn to my colleague. At the time, the circumstances were still under investigation, and I would say that until the Canadian Security Intelligence Service was able to provide evidence that pointed to their willing collaboration that was undeclared, and that would have been in June of 2020, there was not evidence of their affiliations with external actors.
Ms. Jeffrey, I find that respectfully, and I know you weren't in charge at the time, but I find that astounding because in March of 2019, PHAC had a fact-finding report that indicated that there had been multiple breaches by Dr. Cheng and Dr. Chu with respect to security, with respect to intellectual property, and that indeed they had been on an unauthorized basis collaborating with the PRC, including the People's Liberation Army. So how at Canada's highest security lab, a level 4 lab, would they have continued to have unfettered access with PHAC having that information?
Mr. Chair, what I can say is that the evidence of their involvement in the talent programs and the foreign associations and some of their travel were not presented to the Public Health Agency until June 30th, 2020.
The fact-finding report was presented to PHAC on March 23rd, 2019, and that report contained all of the things that I just mentioned.
It's very important, given the seriousness of allegations, that we have evidence to back up the allegations.
Ms. Jeffrey, it was a fact-finding report. What evidence was needed to say that perhaps it's not a good idea to have two scientists who are working with Beijing on an unauthorized basis, including the PLA, to have access to a level 4 lab? I think common sense would indicate that they should not have been there after that time.
The administrative investigation that was concluded in the spring of 2019 specifically said that that an administrative investigation needed to be launched in order to determine if the allegations that had been raised in the fact-finding were indeed founded. So they were still allegations at that point in time, and in July 2019, both employees, as a result of that, were placed on leave without pay.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. It's now Ms. Yip's turn for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for coming on a Friday to speak with us. Ms. Jeffries, would there have been an instance where PHAC would table drop the documents without going through the appropriate vetting process?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The information in these administrative investigations is clearly information that is subject to the Privacy Act. It also includes highly sensitive national security information, including information provided by the Canadian Security Intelligence Service. The need to protect and ensure that these documents are disclosed in a protected setting underpinned the redactions that were initially made. So there is no circumstance that I'm aware of where these types of reports are released unredacted because of the acts that apply.
Ms. Jeffrey, in your opening statement, you spoke about a supportive culture. Could you elaborate on that?
Collaboration in research is at the heart of scientific advancement, public health research in particular, and in particular into the consequences of these pathogens, as we saw, for example, in the Ebola outbreak in West Africa, in the SARS outbreak in Canada, and most recently with COVID-19, show that international collaboration is essential to advance quickly to keep pace with evolving and mutating viruses. It's important, while safeguarding the security of these pathogens and toxins, as well as of our science, to be able to collaborate in a secure environment. So it is very important that our personnel understand and work within policies that allow them to collaborate where necessarily, while respecting the need to protect their work from unauthorized use. And so it is, I think, in this type of context, and certainly as you've seen in the security awareness and in the recently launched research security policy writ large across the country, it's very, very important that our science personnel are able to collaborate, but at the same time are very aware of the need for review, approvals, permissions, and appropriate boundaries on that collaboration.
Does that supportive culture extend to Chinese Canadian scientists? Since the incident at Winnipeg Labs, the sensitive research guidelines, as you've mentioned, have been introduced, resulting in a list of research organizations that are believed to pose a high risk to national security. Most of the organizations named on the list are Chinese. This has hindered funding applications and career advancement for some Chinese Canadian scientists, based not necessarily on any association with organizations on the list, but based solely on their Chinese surnames. What assurances can you provide to these scientists?
It's for exactly this reason that the investigation processes that we conducted at the time were so thorough and relied on evidence rather than allegations. The processes that we have in place now to review research collaborations and affiliations are broad-based and not specific to particular individuals. All of our scientists must sign a code of conduct and are required to declare conflicts of interest and affiliations. In this case, we had scientists that sought to hide and had undeclared affiliations, and that was the reason why they were fired. Scientists who work in the full knowledge and with declared conflicts of interest and affiliations have nothing to fear from the processes that we have enhanced and put in place.
Mr. Lucas or Mr. Polyquin or Mr. Shepherd, do you have any further comments on this issue?
I would just note that the approach that Ms. Jeffrey articulated in terms of research security is of our labs is also undertaken at Health Canada in our labs, albeit at which have different function and different biosecurity levels, and indeed across the government, consistent with the policies that Minister Champagne and most recently Minister Holland have articulated in terms of research security.
Thank you, Ms. Yip. Now it's Mr. Villemer's turn for 2.5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Jeffrey.
Thank you, Ms. Jeffrey. I only have 2.5 minutes, so I'm going to go pretty quickly. After finding out about the report, what we can what we're faced with is the naivety or the incompetence of this organization. During your last witness testimony, you said that the security control process starts with a reliability security clearance, and then the file is transmitted to the RCMP and CSIS to obtain a security clearance code. Then there is... was your reasoning based on the reasoning of CSIS, the RCMP, or other organizations? Please cut right to the chase.
Much, Mr. Chair. In the process that we undertake to provide security clearances, the Public Health Agency and the security branch of the health portfolio undertakes the initial reliability checks, etc. All security clearances go through a process of verification by the RCMP and then are referred for secret security clearances to the Canadian Security Intelligence Service that conducts the loyalty and reliability assessments. And they send their assessments back to Fact Security, and the final decisions are made in the case of these clearances. For example, when indices were raised by the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, the deputy head of the agency took the decision to revoke the clearance.
Vous avez quand même dit que ces gens-là avaient une undeclared affiliation.
You did say that these people had an undeclared affiliation. The Army, the Popular Liberation Army, is not small potatoes. A decision was made based on these investigations. Were they complete? Did you not have any idea? Because the Liberation Army is not some NGO.
Security clearances are periodically reviewed. At the time that the security clearances were granted, these were scientists of long standing working at the agency. None of the indices or events that subsequently emerged were evident, and indeed in these documents there is no evidence prior to this time of covert activities.
Je retiendrai que les politiques ne fonctionnent pas.
So the policies don't work, that's what I understand. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Villemer. Ms. Idlout, you have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. My next couple of questions are regarding Canada's or others' view of Canada and whether Canada's credibility has been impacted. So do you believe that the Winnipeg lab incident has impacted Canada's credibility with the research institutions of our NATO and Five Eyes partners?
The National Microbiology Lab is a world-renowned research institution of high reputation. Our partners internationally also face similar threats of foreign interference and are adopting many similar measures. The science of the lab remains well respected. The lab continues to be accredited, for example, by U.S. counterparts to the highest standards of biosafety and biosecurity. So no, I don't believe that the lab's reputation suffered, given the action that we took and given the strengthening of the security protocols since that time.
Could you elaborate more on what you mean by the policies or the strategies that may have changed to make sure that we have greater resilience in the scientific institutions?
The measures that we took were in several different domains. There have been physical security measures and enhancements related to our protocols around shipping, around physical security of the lab, access controls. We have more stringent policies in terms of the use of students at the lab. We have strengthened our intellectual property protocols. We have strengthened our cybersecurity measures. We have a detailed program of cooperation with the Canadian Security Intelligence Service and public safety to ensure that we're abreast of any changes in the security landscape. And we have enhanced our training and protocols for our staff so that they're aware and are able to flag any incidents that might be of concern for further investigation.
You're just about out of time. Okay. All right. Thank you. Dr. Ellis, you have 5 minutes now.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks everyone for being here. To you, Ms. Jeffrey, you talked about security clearances being reviewed on a regular basis. Can you talk about what the current policy is?
The current security screening process for security clearances at the secret level requires review every 10 years unless incidents arise that require a review for cause of that clearance, as was the case in this situation.
Thank you very much. And through you, Chair, can you tell us before this incident, when were these security clearances for, just for Dr. Chu, when was it last reviewed before this incident?
I'm sorry, I don't have that information at hand.
Could you please provide that to the committee, please?
Yes.
Thank you for that. Are there any health scientists of any nationality currently working for the Government of Canada who have participated in one of the over 200 PRC talent recruitment programs?
I'm not able to comment on that. I can comment about the processes at the Public Health Agency, where we require conflict of interest and affiliation declarations from all of our scientists, indeed from all of our personnel. And I can say that participation in talent programs of foreign countries, if declared, would be a significant conflict of interest and would not be accepted.
Thank you for that. And through you, Chair, can you tell the committee, to the best of your knowledge, are there any employees working at labs in Canada now who are members of talent programs?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I'm unable to comment on labs across the country. I can only comment on the declared affiliations and conflicts of interest of the staff at the Public Health Agency, as I previously mentioned.
Yes, so how many scientists would fall into that?
Monsieur le Président.
Point of order.
Yes, Mr. Villemar.
Comme indiqué plus
As previously said, as I mentioned earlier, Ms. Jeffrey is trailing off. Her voice is trailing off, and I can't hear the end of her questions, of her answers, rather.
Okay, I'll give some floor cues. Okay, all right. Do you need the preceding answer to be repeated, Mr. Villemar?
Oui, s'il vous plaît.
Yes, please.
Okay, I've stopped the clock, so if you can repeat that, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What I can say is, first of all, I'm the deputy head of the Public Health Agency of Canada. I'm not in a position to comment on the participation of scientists across the country. I can comment on the work of the personnel that belong to the Public Health Agency. I can say that they're required to submit declarations of affiliations for research and also conflict of interest. If they were, those types of talent programs would be required to be declared. If they were declared, they would constitute a conflict of interest and would not be allowed, given the nature of their work. And in the case that's at issue today, the scientists hid and, in fact, lied about those affiliations. And when they were discovered, those scientists were terminated because of that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just to be
Yeah, go ahead,
be clear, Chair, I would I would suggest I have 3 minutes left. Am I clear with that?
Yep.
Thank you very much. Dr. Lucas, what we heard from Ms. Jeffrey just now is that there would be no scientists known to be participating in any talent programs that the Government of Canada would be aware of. Is that your indication as well, sir?
Mr. Chair, similar to the response of Madame Jeffrey, I can speak to Health Canada and the regulatory scientists in Health Canada who perform product reviews in the context of the Food and Drug Act and other statutes are subject to the same requirements in terms of declarations of conflict of interest and affiliations. And on the basis of those, to our knowledge, there are no affiliations or conflicts of concern, including talent programs.
Thank you very much. No, thank you for that, Dr. Lucas. Through you, Chair, I'll ask the same question to Ms. Hudgens. Are you aware of any scientists with declared affiliations with talent programs who are currently working for the Government of Canada?
Thank you for the question. The answer to that question is similar to that of Ms. Jeffrey and Dr. Lucas. I have no knowledge of that and am unable to make that blanket assertion.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, to Ms. Jeffrey, we now know that the Dr. Chu's computer was mirrored in about February of 2019. Yet in spite of all that, shipments of Ebola and Henipavirus were allowed to continue on March 31st, 2019. Do you think that's appropriate?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I mentioned, there was extensive international collaboration in responding to the Ebola outbreak that took place in West Africa from 2014 to 2016. The work that the National Microbiology Lab and indeed the life's work of Dr. Chu was in therapeutics to respond to Ebola. The collaboration that was taking place was authorized and was fully approved through the procedures that were in place.
Thanks, Ms. Jeffrey. Through you, Chair, if I might interrupt you, I apologize for that, but I didn't ask you if they were approved. I asked you, do you think it's appropriate given what you now know?
I think that international collaboration on therapeutics for pathogens and toxins continues to be very important to the development of the science. I would say that obviously in hindsight, given the activities of these scientists, which emerged much later in that timeline, and evidence of those activities, we would obviously look at decisions that were taken around their work sooner. But the work of collaboration on Ebola continued to be an international priority. And indeed, many countries, Canada included, the United States, but also including China, were active in Western Africa, responding on the ground to the Ebola outbreak. And it was in that vein that the collaboration was approved and the work authorized.
Thank you, Dr. Ellis. We'll now go to Mr. Erskine Smith for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Chair. On the one hand, we had the director of CSIS at this committee earlier, and he said, in his view, that PHAC acted expeditiously. That's a good thing. I do want to pick up, though, on my colleague's questioning just now. So I understand the rationale for the shipment of Ebola to the Wuhan Institute of Virology at the end of March in 2019. It's my understanding when I looked through the email chains, it was Dr. Chu that instigated that transfer, yes?
I will turn to my colleague, Dr. Peopleâ, to talk about the rationale for that transfer. It was related to Dr. Chu's work, but over to you, Dr. Peopleâ.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Indeed, Dr. Chu has been a longstanding, at that point, and internationally recognized scientist who had led the development of the Ebola monoclonal antibodies, which were trialed.
I understand it, but she was the instigator of the transfer. Yes or no?
Dr. Chu was the primary interlocutor with WIP.
Okay, and yet at the same time, I mean, a week earlier, and Presidia didn't get nearly the facts that CSIS was able to uncover. But they were contracted December 2018, and there's a preliminary report. They've got investigative findings. In their investigative findings, they say, and related to the patent, the undisclosed patent by Dr. Chu, they say it's highly improbable that she did not know. They go on to note there's a collaboration with a number of individuals, including at the Chinese Academy of Military Medical Sciences, for which there may not be a letter of support and further investigations required. At that point, there's an investigation underway specifically related to Dr. Chu. How is it that PHAC officials, I've seen the email chains, there are other PHAC officials that are obviously doing the approvals here, no red flags? I'll stay with Mr. Poliquin. You seem to know more. Like, no red flags here? Why no red flags? How could there possibly not be red flags?
So as Ms. Jeffrey had highlighted, China had been very active in the 2014-2016 West Africa Ebola outbreak.
I don't mean about China. I mean about Dr. Chu. Dr. Chu's under investigation. There's a report related to Dr. Chu, March 23rd. She's the instigating force behind this transfer. How are there not red flags at that point?
So, Mr. Chair, the investigation was, as has been previously highlighted, these were allegations, and further investigation was ongoing.
Well, except that the report does say it's highly improbable that she did not know about the patent. So further investigation is warranted, but they're already casting aspersions on the authenticity of her answers at that point. I don't know. Like, I'll be honest. Like, on the chain of events, a major overblown commentary from conservatives. We've got CSIS director coming here saying no expeditious action, but I do look at the email chains here on approvals, and look, PHAC was aware of this too. I see an email from Alan Lau on April 3rd saying we didn't do anything wrong. ... Just that because of the nature of the pathogens and where it was going, they, the higher ups in PHAC, wanted to know if we did our due diligence. But it strikes me if full due diligence had been done, specifically in relation to Dr. Chu, that transfer does not occur at the end of March. Is that fair to say?
So the investigations were ongoing at that time, and the procedures were ongoing.
Okay. My last question in terms of time, Ms. Jeffrey, you'd said to my colleague, Mr. Fragaskatis, and I appreciate it, that there were no unauthorized removals. At the same time, there are many documented instances where restricted visitors had inappropriate access. You've got shipments regularly mislabeled. Given the evidence of lying from Dr. Chu and Dr. Chang, the evidence where they were completely untruthful on multiple occasions, matched with the evidence of mislabeling and inappropriate access for restricted visitors, what makes you so confident that there were no unauthorized removals? What do you base that on?
I base that statement on the very rigorous multi-key approach that we have to safeguarding pathogens and toxins, and I'll turn to Dr. Poliquin to talk about the audit process that ensures that we have an accurate accounting constantly of those materials.
Yeah, so thank you, Mr. Chair. Under the HPTA regulations, inventory control for these pathogens is very complex and involves regular auditing of the materials that is done independently of any of the scientists, and has been an ongoing process over the past 20 years. In following the regular audit procedures, but also in the wake of the incidents, audits were conducted, and we can confirm that all specimens that were expected to be there and logged are present and accounted for.
I appreciate that, and I know, Mr. Chair, I'm out of time, and I appreciate all the answers. I would just say it would be even better if you said we've done a lot of due diligence, we did the best we could, and CSIS is coming to your defense in a great, serious way. I think acknowledging that transfer at the end of March was a mistake would also be welcome. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Erskine-Smith. Now, we're going into a little bit into our second hour. Would the committee like to go to 6 minutes each and then go back to the 5, 5, 2.5, 2.5? Are you, or do you want to continue 5, 5, 2.5, 2? I'm thinking particularly of the Bloc and the NDP to have a little bit of extra question time. Why not?
Je serais évidemment favorable à 6 minutes.
Of the committee, and we are,
I would, of course, agree to 6 minutes.
so the committee? We should just
I'm
continue
sorry?
with,
I'm sorry. The issue is that we're normally, after an hour, we flip, we flip panels, and then we begin, with the routine all over, 6 minutes each side, then 5, 5, 2.5, 2.5. I'm just asking the committee if they want to revert to that pattern for this second hour.
I believe, Mr. Chair, since it is a whole single 2-hour panel, we should abide by the terms of the routine motion adopted at the beginning of this committee to continue as the routine motion specifies.
Any other comments on this? All right, well, we will live then according to the routine motions, and we will go to Mr. Chong for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam Jeffrey, you mentioned several times that international collaboration in research between level 4 labs in the area of human pathogens and viruses is important. So my question is asked in that context. The named research organizations list that Public Safety has put out, developed by Public Safety, does not include the Wuhan Institute of Virology. That list, though, does state that institutions that are not on the list may still pose a risk, and that different entities within the Government of Canada are to take that risk and assess it, even though institutions like the Wuhan Institute of Virology may not be on the list. And so my question is, the Minister of Health had, I think, previously said that there was collaboration going on between entities in the PRC and the National Microbiology Laboratory, and then later said that there wasn't any collaboration going on. So my simple question is, can you confirm that there is no ongoing collaboration, either in terms of transfers of information or materials, between the lab in Winnipeg and any entities in the People's Republic of China, including the Wuhan Institute of Virology?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. I can confirm that there are no, since this collaboration that we've been speaking of today was ended, there is no collaboration with the government of China or institutes in China on issues related to the lab or any others. Minister Holland was referring to the fact that we continue to participate in UN and other multilateral bodies where it's possible that there could be representatives of the government of China present, but there is no bilateral cooperation or collaboration agreements now.
Okay,
Mr.
thank
Chong,
you.
I'm going to just stop the clock. Mr. Villemur lost connection, and we're just getting him back on, so
Sure.
we'll just suspend for a moment.
Thank you.
we are back. We're still trying to connect with Mr. Peopleâ. We'll do our best, but in the meantime, the business must proceed. Mr. Chong, you have 2 minutes, 42 seconds.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is for the Deputy Minister of Health. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, we're trying to understand why it took 10 months for the lab to be secured. And so my question is, when did the Deputy Minister of Health first become aware of the issues in the Winnipeg lab? Was it in 2018 or 2019?
Mr. Chair, I assumed my role at Health Canada at the beginning of September 2019. I don't have specific information pertaining to my predecessor being informed, but I would assume he would have been informed at key junctures by the president of the Public Health Agency at that time.
Could you get back to the committee with that information? Because it's material.
Yes.
Thank you. Madam Jeffrey, you mentioned several times in your opening remarks and otherwise that you refer to processes that have been put in place that are broad-based, not related to any specific individuals, that your security posture and policies have been strengthened and adapted, and that specific personnel security measures have been updated. Could you tell us a little bit about what exactly those processes, those policies, those postures, those measures are?
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. I'm happy to speak specifically about some of the policies. For obvious reasons, the details of operational physical security measures we won't speak to. But I would point to, for example, the review of all collaboration agreements by a science security committee in addition to the investigators and the lab management. I would point to enhanced compliance monitoring from our security branch, as well as via partnerships with our security and law enforcement agencies. I would point to the mandatory requirement for not just conflict of interest, but affiliation declarations, and the access control systems, the new student policies that require appropriate clearances. And
time
have
has
any of these
expired, Mr. Chong. Sorry.
Okay.
There will be further opportunities. I think we have
Thank
a bit of time left. Ms. Lalonde, you now have 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président, et j'aimerais remercier.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today.
Some concerns surrounding whether we have the appropriate security measures to set up a level 4 lab in Saskatchewan. Would you say that they are, that, based on our readiness, that we're ready to set up a level 4 lab in Canada? And what are the processes that would be in place prior to approving a level 4 lab?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. The Human Pathogens and Toxins Act has very stringent requirements for work that happens with pathogens of different risk groups. There is a list of pathogens according to their safeguards and the requirements for them. The budget recently announced also has presented that new legislation is being brought forward to enhance the regulations further, given the post-pandemic requirements for Canada to have domestic laboratory and health and life sciences and biomanufacturing capabilities to provide health security for us against future health threats and future potential pandemics. The processes under the HCPA require licensing. They require clearances for all personnel. They require a graduated approach to be put in place that limit how and with what new facilities will be able to work. There's inspection and on-site monitoring that is required, and the clearance processes have also been enhanced. Any application for a potential new laboratory requiring that it would be subject to the HPTA, including level 3 and level 4 labs, would require stringent regulation, and licenses and approvals would not be granted for their operation without having detailed planning in place.
Well, thank you, Mrs. Jeffrey. Through you, Mr. Chair, again, I would like to know what are the processes in place to protect the national security when working with international collaboration in laboratory research? And maybe can you also give some example of why Canada's collaboration with other countries on scientific research is actually so crucial?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The work that we undertook at the Public Health Agency and through the National Microbiology Lab in the response to COVID-19 is an excellent example of the linkages that are required to combat a novel pathogen. I'd like to turn to Dr. Peopleâ to give some of the concrete examples of how the work with our colleagues advanced those efforts.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Indeed, international collaboration in this space is essential for advancement of the work. A concrete example pertinent here would be the development of the Ebola monoclonal antibody cocktail. Involved the development of multiple components of that treatment, which some of them came from American innovation and advancement. And it's by putting together those advances that the ultimate product was realized. By extension, our ability to collaborate internationally and bring together the best minds to tackle the problems at hand are an essential feature of that work. However, we are very cognizant and have become even more so of the shifting threat environment that we operate in. Hence why any new collaborations that are born out of the NML involve a security dimension and security review prior to us commencing the work.
Thank you very much. And if I have time, I would like to ask one more question. What is the purpose of the National Microbiology Laboratory sharing samples with other public health laboratories?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It is essential to share samples between the level 4 labs, as these are what enable the science to be done. By having the specimens on hand, we are able to do diagnostic development, applied research, and medical countermeasure development. But a lot of that work is essentially rooted in having access to the samples to do the work.
Thank you, Ms. Lalonde. Now,
thank you.
Mr. Villemur has rejoined us. We're sorry to have lost you there for a few moments. I just wanted to bring you up to speed on where we are. You will have the next 2.5 minutes, followed by Ms. Idlaug for 2.5 minutes. We then have Mr. Cooper for 5 minutes and Mr. Erskine Smith for 5 minutes. And my calculation gives us time for another round of 5, 5, 2.5, and 2.5. So be thinking about who you would like from your team. It's pretty obvious from Bloc and the NDP, but Liberals and Conservatives just get your lineup ready for that last go round. Okay, so Mr. Villemur, 2.5 minutes, sir. You may be on mute, Mr. Villemur, but can you hear us?
So he has to unplug and plug his.
I think the request is for you to unplug your headset and plug it back in again. Do that. I'll tell you what, we'll flip it. Ms. Idlaut, are you ready for 2.5 minutes? Okay, we'll go to Ms. Idlaut first and back to you, Mr. Villemur, in 2.5 minutes. Go ahead.
Kuyanami Exhibitory, thank you, Chair. What other countries should the committee be aware of in terms of foreign interference in our research institutions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that's a question that is probably best posed to the Canadian Security Intelligence Service and our national security colleagues. At the Public Health Agency, we are alert to ensuring that all of our international collaborations are approved and vetted, and we have fully implemented the research policy on sensitive technology research, including the National Security Guidelines for Research Partnerships and with named research organizations. And so we are fully compliant with all of those procedures, but the realm of foreign interference is in the national security domain, not in public health.
Okay, thank you. In terms of potential future threats that are most concerning to PHAC, and what should we as parliamentarians be aware of in terms of your work on future preparedness?
As we saw during the COVID pandemic, there remain significant public health threats in a globalized world. We are currently undertaking work and research looking at H5N1, avian influenza, measles outbreaks, Mpox. We have daily threat assessment and response meetings assessing all of these threats. Our lab and the level 3 and level 4 facilities that we have are essential to look at some of the high consequence pathogens. I'll turn to Dr. Polycan to outline some of the additional areas of his work.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Indeed, at this time, we are living in a period where we are seeing increasing activity of diseases, and part of the role of the National Microbiology Lab is to remain abreast of these. Mpox is a good example with a recent outbreak domestically, but an ongoing activity in the Democratic Republic of Congo, for example. It is through connections globally and with our international partners that we are able to keep abreast of what is happening in other countries, and that helps to inform our work in our preparedness, both in terms of diagnostics to be ready to detect new threats, but also medical countermeasures to help to combat them.
Thank you, Mr. Loud. We've lost Mr. Villemer again. If we do manage to get him back and fully functioning, I'd like to give him 5 minutes because he's missed 2 rounds, okay? Mr. Cooper, you do have 5 minutes now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madame Jeffrey, have any of the processes, posture, policies, or measures recently implemented triggered any review of security clearances in PHAC other than the standard review every 10 years?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think as the committee is aware, there is an ongoing RCMP investigation, and I'd have to refer the committee to my colleagues at Public Safety and the RCMP in terms of their investigations and any work that's underway there.
That's Dr. Chu and Dr. Chang.
I'm not aware of the details of their investigations, so I will have to refer you to Public Safety.
Thank you. Are PRC citizens who are not Canadian citizens nor citizens of formerly allied countries allowed to be granted secret security clearances?
The policy on security clearance is set by the Treasury Board Secretariat, and it is irrespective of nationality.
Thank you for that. Paragraph 31 of the June 30th, 2020 CSIS assessment, and Dr. Chu states that an individual...
Mr. Villemer, you're back with us, are you?
Oui, monsieur.
All right.
Yes.
What we're going to do is we're going to give you 5 minutes because you've missed 2 of your 2.5-minute segments. We have Mr. Cooper now, we have Mr. Erskine Smith, and then we'll go to you for 5 minutes, okay?
Merci beaucoup, c'est très apprécié.
All right.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated.
Michael's 3.5 minutes.
Ms. Jeffrey, through you, Mr. Chair, paragraph 31 of the June 30th, 2020 CSIS assessment and Dr. Chu states that an individual identified as restricted visitor number 1 had access to the Winnipeg lab. This individual was an employee of the People's Liberation Army-controlled Beijing Institute of Biotechnology, whose mentor was a major general identified as Beijing's chief biological defense expert engaged in research relating to biodefense and bioterrorism. Did this individual have a secret security clearance?
I'm going to refer to Dr. Politican about the processes for restricted visitors at the lab.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
It's yes or no.
In terms of access to the laboratory, restricted visitors were a special category of individuals that were under escort at all times, but would not have had access to high containment laboratories.
So who authorized this Beijing military scientist access to the lab?
I would say that the policy on visitors restricted their access to areas in line with the clearances that they had, and so there would have been no access of visitors to restricted level 3.
That's not my question. They had access to the lab. They were in the lab. They might not have been in the level 4 part of the lab, and I'm asking you, Ms. Jeffrey, or whoever may answer, who authorized that access to a Beijing military scientist whose mentor was Beijing's foremost expert in bioterrorism?
I'll first say that when we use the term National Microbiology Lab, we're referring to a complex of buildings that has both secure and public facilities. I'll turn to our Chief Security Officer to talk about the policy.
I want to know who authorized that individual.
We will return to the committee with that information. I don't have it at hand.
Paragraph 54 of the same CSIS assessment states that Dr. Chu gave access to the lab to at least 2 individuals who were employed with PRC institutions whose work is not aligned with Canadian interests. Did Dr. Chu on her own have the authority to grant access to those individuals, and if not, who did?
I'll refer to Dr. Politican for the procedures at the lab.
Yes, prior to access to the laboratory, so at the time, an individual would have been able to fill out a facility access request form for a particular individual, and those are submitted to the security division for review to provide access. But as previously stated, access to the laboratory does not give full access to all parts of the laboratory. There are strict
I understand that, and I thank you for that clarification. I presume that would also apply to the Beijing military scientist who was a restricted visitor. Would CSIS intelligence assessments or reviews been undertaken before those individuals would have been granted access to the lab?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll turn to our Chief Security Officer to talk about the procedures.
Thank you for the question. The individuals attending the lab would be attending as temporary visitors under the policy at the time, which required them to be escorted if they were in the lab. They were granted access because they were not going to be in any part of the lab that was secure or required a clearance.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Now, Mr. Erskine-Smith, you have 5 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I don't want to dwell on this, but I do want to ask one follow-up in relation to that transfer at the end of March in 2019. There's a big difference between marching someone out, escorting someone out via the RCMP, and curtailing one's authority while an investigation is ongoing. And when someone is under investigation with serious allegations that have potentially national security consequences, due process, of course, is justified, but in the interest of security, our national security, surely we should be looking at curtailing individual authority. And so when we look at lessons learned here to ensure this does not happen again, are you looking at the processes by which one might curtail someone's authority while an investigation is ongoing?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would say that our security processes and procedures have been enhanced across the board, and we have in place additional policies around security clearances, around access controls, around the types of visitors and students that are able to access the lab that are much more stringent than there were at the time, which would provide.
So knowing that, and apologies for cutting you off, but knowing that, if the policies that you now put in place had been in place and these allegations have been made, there's an investigation ongoing, you have the initial preliminary report from Presidia, and then the transfer happens at the end of March, would the transfer have happened at the end of March, knowing what we knew as of the end of March with the current policies now in place?
I can say is it's a hypothetical question, Mr. Chair, because the collaboration.
Well, it's not, because we have we have the evidence as of that date at March, and we have new policies. We apply current policies to a fact pattern that is existing. It's not hypothetical, it's an existing fact pattern. So would that transfer have occurred at the end of March 2019 if the current policies had been in place?
What I would say is under the current policies, there would have been 2 additional layers of review for that collaboration, which was in fact approved in November of 2018, although the shipment took place later. So the collaboration was approved much earlier in line with the policies at the time. The difference now is that it would be approved by 2 additional layers of review.
Okay, well, if the answer isn't no, it doesn't necessarily stop the transfer. You might want to still revisit those policies, because the answer is, of course, it should have stopped that transfer. Okay, the second avenue of questions I want to get to. So Presidia is contracted December 2018. They've got their first report March 2019. They've got a second report February 2020. They find effectively nothing of value in comparison to what CSIS finds out. CSIS has a preliminary assessment April 2020, and mere matter of months later, June 2020, they blow the whole thing open, and that's why Dr. Chu is ultimately marched out of the lab. Why did CSIS not get involved earlier?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. CSIS was involved from the outset. Indeed, it was an awareness session with CSIS that led the security branch to begin investigations, working with the lab to see if we had vulnerabilities of the nature they described. And obviously, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service has tools and methods available to them under their act that affords them greater insight into covert and clandestine activities, and they've appeared before this committee previously. The public health agency could only act on the information provided to us, and the investigation that the service conducted was disclosed to us on June 30th, 2020, and we took action at that time. What I would say is that individuals...
Can I ask on that? Just the difference between the outcomes related to the Presidia analysis and investigation versus the CSIS analysis and investigation, again, knowing what we know today, do you think we ought to have gone, PHAC ought to have gone and had CSIS undertake assessments, more detailed assessments earlier in the process?
The Canadian Security Intelligence Service was involved and informed of the activities that were underway from the outset of the cases that are underway. So as disclosed in the documents, they were engaged and aware, and we were working together as of August and September 2018.
So then simple yes, no, and so you don't, do you see a material difference in the quality of investigation between Presidia and CSIS?
Yes, of course, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service has tools available to them under the Act that only they have. They were involved in the fact-finding and the investigation all the way along. It wasn't until the later stages of that investigation that they were able to obtain the information that informed that June 30th letter. For example, on their letter of April 9th, they had not yet found the information that was available to them later That letter suggested that there still was no reason to suggest that the scientists had willingly cooperated and that they were vulnerable. Clearly, in the intervening time between April 9th and June 30th, their investigations and their tools uncovered information that radically changed that assessment, and we acted immediately on receiving that information. This was a case where people took steps to hide their activities, and the national security and law enforcement investigations were deploying all their tools throughout to try and uncover additional evidence, and eventually did so on June 30th.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Mr. Erskine-Smith. Now, just again to recap where we are, because he missed a couple of rounds, Mr. Villamur, you're getting the next 5 minutes. We'll then go to Dr. Ellis, Mr. Franciscatos, and then 2.5 minutes for Mr. Villamur and 2.5 minutes for Ms. Idlout, and I think that'll just about wrap up the session. So, Mr. Villamur, good to have you back with us. 5 minutes to you, sir.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for my colleagues for their understanding. Ms. Jeffrey, I'm listening to your answers, and it sounds like everything is going smoothly. There are policies in place, and then we added policies, and there was no problem. Policies usually protect people who are of goodwill, but we don't know what to do with those who are not of goodwill. I'd like you to be specific. Some people were held responsible. Were there any consequences on those who were directly responsible for these mistakes?
Individuals that hid their activities and undertook clandestine collaboration have been terminated, fired from public service and the like.
Excusez-moi.
Sorry to cut you off. I'm not talking about the two. I'm not talking about the scientists. I'm talking about the people at the agency. I'm talking about those who should have been paying attention when they weren't. Was there anybody other than the scientists who were responsible for this mess?
Say that it was actually the Public Health Agency that first raised issues about potential activity that was underway that launched the investigation. The Canadian Security Intelligence Service has already stated that we acted as expeditiously as we could, given the information that was available. We found allegations. We followed them up with an administrative investigation. We sought the evidence, working with our security and intelligence partners, and we fired the scientists involved. The processes and policies that we put in place are designed to have further layers of security and process that will allow us to detect efforts to disguise collaborations and affiliations and other motivations as quickly as possible in future.
Est-ce qu'il y avait de l'incompétence?
Ms. Jeffrey, was there any incompetence in the management of the agency at that point?
In this case, the leadership of the agency and of the lab took steps as quickly as they could to respond to the information. They detected and raised the allegations, and measures were put in place accordingly.
Est-ce qu'il y avait de l'incompétence à l'agent?
Was there any incompetence at the agency?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In this case, we are talking about scientists who, despite clearances and work that was widely recognized as leading science globally, hid their activities.
Sorry to cut you off. I'd like to be clear. I understand that they are high-level scientists who hid their activities, and you were protecting the Canadian population by implementing certain policies. When you caught wind of their activities, you reacted. But before realizing, there was a lot of time that went on. There are a lot of people that may have been committing actions that were not appropriate. I understand that once the red flag was raised, you acted. But before that, was there anybody who was incompetent? Are you taking for granted that some people were acting in good faith? I understand about the scientists, but we're coming into a labyrinth here. There's scientists and so on. I'm asking about the competence or incompetence of people.
I would say that, Mr. Chair, the policies that were put in place, for example, on students, in retrospect, afforded too much latitude to scientists that were obviously had a clandestine agenda of which we were not aware. And as a result, those policies have been changed. But the policies themselves were respected in those cases, and the policies that we put in place now are far more stringent, and our compliance mechanisms are strengthened and regularly revisited. So we have learned lessons from this and strengthened our policies accordingly.
Donc, vous avez renforcé vos...
So you strengthened your policies following negligence that you observed. The minister at the beginning of April said that there was a list of people who we shouldn't be doing business with, if you will. We don't find any mention to Wuhan. How come?
The composition of the list is by the security and public safety and security services under the auspices of ISED. The Public Health Agency isn't privy to the details of why certain institutions have been placed on that list, but we are in full compliance.
Merci beaucoup. Merci. Je comprends que
Thank you. I understand that the agency made absolutely no mistakes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Villemer. Now we'll go to Dr. Ellis for the next 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. To you, Dr. Politican, around the transfer of Ebola and Henipa virus, would you say that the national security was lax and that science took precedent over national security?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think at the time there was a longstanding effort, I would say, on the part, as demonstrated in West Africa by China deploying over 100 health personnel as an example to help combat.
Dr. Politican, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I didn't ask for a lecture on Ebola. I've had those before. My question today is, national security was lax and science was chosen over national security. Is that not true, sir?
So, Mr. Chair, in this context, the aim of this was to reinforce public health security through the development of medical countermeasures was the stated purpose of the collaboration. And as such, the transfer was authorized.
Thanks very much, Dr. Politican. That being said, we knew that these scientists were under investigation for perhaps 9 months before the transfer occurred. If the transfer did not occur, what would the harm have been?
Well, Mr. Chair, the efforts underway were for the development of medical countermeasures. So should the several potential candidates for the treatment of Ebola as well as Henipa have been published since then, it is difficult to ascertain what could have happened, but certainly innovations that have been published in the public domain would likely not have occurred.
Thank you very much. Through you, Chair, before Dr. Chu's collaboration with the PRC and the Wuhan Institute of Virology, was the Wuhan Institute of Virology a level 4 lab? Simple yes or no.
I'll turn to Dr. Politican on that.
Are you asking whether
was the Wuhan Institute a level 4 lab before Dr. Chu's collaboration?
As far as I understand, the WIV was developed as a level 4 facility.
That was not my question, sir. Did Dr. Chu's involvement help the lab get developed, which is now a long-standing level 4 lab?
Mr. Chair, I cannot speak to whether Dr. Chu's involvement was essential to that process.
Thank you for that. Through you, Chair, Dr. Politican, do you know, did the Government of Canada have an MOU with the PRC or the WIV, the Wuhan Institute, to help its development into a level 4 lab?
I'm not aware of such a MOU, should it exist.
Through you, Chair, Dr. Lucas, do you know of any MOU that may or may not exist?
Mr. Chair, I'm not aware of any.
And Ms. Jeffrey, through you, Chair, same question.
There was no MOU to establish a level 4 lab. There was in 2007 a science and technical cooperation agreement with China to boost collaborative research and development in the life sciences, including for vaccines. That's the only cooperation agreement of which I'm aware.
Thank you very much. We talked a little bit about the affiliated talent, talent programs and scientists having affiliation with them, Ms. Jeffrey. Would you have Canadians believe that these are the only two scientists with undeclared affiliation to talent programs with foreign governments?
I can't comment on what undeclared collaborations would be there. I can say that at the agency we have a policy requiring affiliations and a conflict of interest. No such affiliations have been declared, and if they were declared, they would not be accepted.
Thank you very much. Through you, Chair, to Dr. Politican, we've heard previously, of course, that Ebola and Hennepin were shipped on a flight. I believe it was Air Canada. I might have that incorrect, the exact carrier, on a commercial carrier. Is that a normal procedure? Now, unlike our friend from the NDP, of course, it was not carried on board. We realize that. But is that a usual procedure?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, the transfer of level 4 pathogens falls under the transport of dangerous goods regulations, which involves the development of an emergency research response action plan, as well as a number of additional checks. But the ultimate carrier for these types of samples is often commercial.
Thank you,
Thank you
Dr.
very much.
Ellis. Mr. Frangistatos, 5 minutes for you.
Thank you, Chair. To Ms. Jeffrey, can you talk a little bit more about the screening processes in place with respect to researchers? How is that particularly different now as a result of this experience?
I would say that there are two levels of screening for all personnel who require clearances. There's, of course, the security screening process, which we've already discussed here, including reliability status, including criminal and Canadian Security Intelligence Service checks. There is also a separate Human Pathogens and Toxins Act clearance that's required to work with any sensitive listed materials, which also requires additional training in the use of those pathogens, as well as a separate security clearance that must be granted by the regulator.
Can we go back to the point on security screening? And I understand that you've already shared with us information on that, but I'm thinking about it especially in terms of the wider international context, which to me I think is fundamental in terms of learning from this experience. Does the security screening process have some kind of harmonization, for lack of a better word, with what other countries are doing from a security screening perspective in their labs, or is it something that's quite unique to Canada? Is there some overlap but not entirely overlap? Any comments on that? Because as we've heard at this committee before, this is not an issue that Canada is dealing with on its own. There's other countries, other allies that have, if not the same experience, very similar experiences or challenges that they're preparing for if they haven't already taken place. So I just wonder about this from a wider international context.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think obviously there are different legislative frameworks in different countries, but I think all countries would have in common a security screening and clearance process similar to the one that we have at large. Countries also have specific legislation, but it would differ for each country, similar to our Human Pathogens and Toxins Act. But I'll turn to Dr. Politican, who has been dealing with labs in other countries, to speak to their processes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Indeed, President Jeffrey is correct that I think conceptually, other laboratories in the level 4 space operate in the same way with respect to the need for additional security screening prior to having access to level 3 and level 4 pathogens, particularly security sensitive ones. But the specific mechanics of how that is ascertained is done at the country level.
Left. To both of you, what are the fundamental lessons learned here from an agency perspective? What has been learned, and what will you continue to be focused on to ensure the absolute security of the lab?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've implemented a whole series of security enhancements based on our lessons learned from this process. The different areas of security policy and procedure that I outlined earlier, so that's ranging from cybersecurity to physical security to security clearances, and above all, employee awareness and education and also compliance are all reflections of the lessons we've learned from these issues. I would say, in addition, the much stronger collaboration with our public safety and Canadian Security Intelligence Service colleagues that began during these incidents, immediately before these incidents, that awareness and outreach to the research community that triggered the agency to look into these cases and ultimately led to the termination of these scientists was the initial program of that work. But our global environment and evolving threat picture is such that we have to be closely joined up throughout the research process and throughout our work and the additional work that we have undertaken with public safety and CSIS through the pandemic context and our emergency response protocols are much tighter and closer than before. And the policies and procedures we put in place from an employee and research perspective are designed to provide flags much earlier than I think would have been the case before these incidents occurred.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Fragasnatos. Back to you, Mr. Villemur, for 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. From our conversation earlier, Ms. Jeffrey, you said that nobody was disciplined internally, nobody was held responsible. Is that correct?
I would say that the two employees that are that actually were in violation of the policies have been terminated, and so those were the disciplinary actions that were taken, and those were the only violations of policies and protocols that were at play in these administrative investigations, and they have been
Thank you. They're not who I was referring to, obviously. I've been listening to your answers for almost 2 hours. You're saying that there were some incidents, it was nobody's fault, we implemented some policies, it's not that big a deal. However, this entire story led to, turned the House of Commons upside down. There are elements that have not yet been revealed, and there was a committee here listening to your answers, and you're acting like there was nothing, and you're giving the impression that nothing happened, which is quite shocking. Yes, if 2 of those scientists were terminated, or their positions were terminated, then there must be a cause. What is the cause?
Very clear that these were very serious security incidents, and they were a violation of the duty of loyalty that all of our scientists strive to uphold every day. We take them very seriously indeed. The protections that are in place to protect national security information and privacy information meant that they could not be fully disclosed in the public domain without appropriate protections, which have been provided by the ad hoc committee and the panel of arbiters. We're very pleased to be here today to discuss them. And I would say that foreign interference, as my Canadian security intelligence colleagues have spoken to in this committee, is a very serious threat, and it's a threat to our scientific research and public health capabilities and our abilities to respond to future threats. And that's the reason why we've put in place so many different measures across the different domains of security and personnel security, as well as cyber and physical security. We take this very seriously, and this duty of care is one that we are now maintaining and enhancing on an ongoing basis. So this is not a static one-time response. We have processes in place to periodically review all of our policies and procedures, to report incidents, to take actions to address them, and I can assure you that we take these duties very, very seriously indeed.
Thank you, Mr. Villemur. Ms. Idlout, you have 2.5 minutes.
Lianami Iksivotari, thank you, Chair. I'll be asking my final questions to the Deputy Minister of Health, Mr. Stephen Lucas, and I'll be asking similar questions that I asked to the Public Health Agency. To you, how often does your department meet with CSIS or other relevant security agencies to improve operational security of Canada's research facilities?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What I would indicate is in the first instance, the Chief Security Officer, who's with us, Nadine Huggins, supports both Health Canada and the Public Health Agency of Canada through the work of her team. And in that regard, as Madame Jeffrey has noted, there is increased engagement as we have reviewed and strengthened a range of policies pertaining to security in our laboratories, increased engagement with CSIS and public safety and other relevant organizations, including the Communication Security Establishment, in regard to cybersecurity.
I guess my last question would be, what policies have changed over the last 5 years to improve the resilience of departmental activities from foreign interference?
Thank you. What I would note is twofold. In the first instance, as I indicated previously, the laboratories at Health Canada have as a fundamental objective supporting our regulatory system. So the focus is not on research per se, but on laboratory methods for testing products such as pharmaceuticals, developing methodologies for air quality monitoring or testing of contaminants in water. The policies and systems put in place to strengthen research security over the past number of years include strengthening physical security in terms of access and monitoring of research facilities. Secondly, strengthening oversight and systems to protect against cybersecurity threats, which are indeed active. And thirdly, the focus on employee security clearance review, conflict of interest and affiliation declaration, training, and oversight, including policies for laboratory visitors and students, as Madame Jeffrey has spoken to previously. And these have been strengthened further to align with work undertaken in regard to all research institutions in Canada, as expressed by Minister Champagne and Ministers Haidu, Duclos, and most recently Minister Holland, including the policies on research in sensitive areas and named research organizations. Our work and policies are aligned to support the objectives and substance of those guidelines and policies to protect the research security at laboratories in Health Canada.
We're just about at the end. I need one quick question, and this is a very broad-based question, if you don't mind. I mean, the basics of any human-to-human transaction or relationship is usually based on the presumption of honesty, that the person you're dealing with is honest. With this experience that you've had and the necessity to protect such sensitive, materials, etc., and knowledge, has that turned around that we now have a presumption that perhaps somebody is not going to be honest and they have to prove their honesty to us? That's a very broad question, but a brief reflection, if you don't mind, Ms. Jeffrey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Indeed, the clearance process itself requires individuals to declare many details of their past affiliations, lives, and work. We do verify through our security office and our chief security officer those declarations with comparing as for all public servants who have clearances There are checks done through the RCMP criminally, also through the Canadian Security Intelligence Services to verify, as well as through open and other source public information. Where individuals seek to hide clandestinely other aspects of their intentions, it's very important that we have policies and procedures that are designed to provide sort of tripwires, if you will, to flag areas for further investigation and research, and to ensure that there is oversight and additional layers of approval for events if indeed the previous checks and clearances don't reveal some of those covert intentions. And so what we have done is, in fact, put additional layers that allow us to do additional steps, to have additional sets of eyes looking at approvals, and to make sure that there is multiple keys, if you will, to unlock different processes and approvals, collaborations, and affiliations. So for us, it is about trusting, but also about verifying, and our security services help us to do that. And our policies and procedures in the area of security help us to be continually vigilant. And I think that's what's really required here. It requires continual vigilance, and it requires awareness, and it requires individuals to act and to flag things that they see that might not be quite in line with policies. And that's a culture, and that is the culture that we're building at the Public Health Agency through the processes we put in place since these incidents now over 4 or 5 years ago.
Mr. Chong has asked for just a quick comment.
I have a question, Mr. Chair, of you. Wonder if you could instruct the analyst to prepare a briefing note for us on describing how security clearances are granted, and in particular, how security Treasury Board guidelines work with respect to security clearances for PRC nationals who are not Canadian citizens.
The request has been made.
Thank you.
Yes. To be honest with you, I would not just limit that to PRC, given what we've heard from the foreign interference. Certainly, the nature of interference, as alleged with China, the PRC is one thing, but there are other actors, and who knows, right? Anyway, listen, I want to thank everybody. Ms. Jeffrey and your colleagues, you've been generous with your time. I know this is not exactly the most comfortable way to spend a Friday afternoon, but we do appreciate your time with us and your answers. To my colleagues, well done today, and to all of the support staff, thank you very much. Meeting adjourned.